Okay, here we go. So yeah, very happy to talk to you about how developers experience working with UX professionals. Joris and Dimitri were already talking about it just before in the previous talk, more in the context of design systems and how design systems can stimulate the collaboration between UXers and developers. Here we'll look at it a little bit more from the communications perspective, mostly in an agile context. Just to briefly introduce myself, a bit beyond the avatar here. So I'm Bert Windey, UX researcher, service designer at Ordina Belgium. What's a UX researcher? So to create an optimal user experience of any product or service we design, um, we need to know what the needs are of the target audience, our future users. What do they need? What are their goals? And to this end, we organize all sorts of activities, interviews, we look at analytics, we can do surveys, and all of this is meant to really understand our users and what they need so we can develop, build experiences, applications, websites that really serve their needs, their goals. I collaborate on a daily basis with developers and designers as a researcher, and mostly that's through multidisciplinary agile Scrum teams. I'm going to come back a little bit on that later on in the presentation. So yeah, first, as a problem statement, sometimes it seems like developers and UX experts are speaking different languages, right? And we mean this both literally and figuratively. So literally, like when we talk about wireframes or mockups, sometimes I think, if you're honest, we're not always speaking about exactly the same thing either. So it is a bit tricky to expect from developers that they would know what we mean if sometimes we're confused ourselves about the exact terminology, right? And more figuratively, as a UX researcher, we come up with all sorts of insights, which we hand over to the designers and the developers. And sometimes we feel that maybe if you look at the end product that's being built at the end of the project, and we look at the finished product, that maybe not everything of these user needs are covered or all of the insights have been taken into account. And the same goes for designers. They hand over, let's say, their design files to the developers, and then at the end, when the product is finished, sometimes they maybe look at it and think, well, not everything that I've specified has come out exactly as I intended. And most likely from the developer's perspective, they also have the feeling that, well, sometimes just research and design is thrown at them over the wall, and then they actually have to build it, right? So all sorts of promises have been made to the business, and now they have to build it. And we feel that there's really a strong need to bridge the gap, because it's only human that we operate a little bit in our little silos. So how can we really improve collaboration, communication? Because in the end, we have the same goal. We just want to build relevant tools, relevant applications and websites. And how can we achieve that through better communication when we collaborate? That was the whole idea of this research project, you might say. So how can we improve communication between UX experts and developers? That's the bottom line. We focus on less mature teams, because teams of designers, researchers, and developers that have collaborated over a long period, they've probably found ways how to collaborate. They've found little tricks. You might wonder what those little tricks and tools and instruments are, of course. But here we focus on what less mature teams can do. Teams that haven't collaborated for so long, don't know each other so well. What basically could you maybe try on Monday when you go back to the office and you feel that this collaboration doesn't always work so well? What could you try? What initiatives could you take? When we started out this project, we did just a little, almost as a joke, a Google search on problems with UX. Basically, we wanted to figure out what's been done, what kind of problems that developers are facing when they work with UXers, what has been done, what has been listed. And it was quite funny to see that the first few pages on Google just basically listed problems that UX designers face, or that problems that UX designers solve. So there was very little to be found on problems that other people face when they work with UX researchers or designers. So we thought it's time to step out of this little Calimero bubble, and let's face the facts and see what it really is to collaborate with us, right? And how did we do this? We decided to apply our own methodology, basically, to this problem. So usually we work with a user-centric design thinking mindset. It's a lot of terms, but we focus on the end user of any application or website that we might want to design. And then we apply a design thinking method. We're going to figure out, as I said in the beginning, what the user needs are, what the user pain points are, and then we're going to ideate some possible solutions with designers, work out different solutions potentially, and then go and test them. And this whole approach, we could actually apply it to this problem, because in a way, developers are our users. As a researcher, I communicate research insights to designers and developers, and designers communicate their designs to developers. So in a way, we wanted to figure out, how do developers perceive working with us? So basically, we decided to eat our own dog food. And we always tell clients that they have to apply this mindset. So we said, okay, now it's on us to apply our own mindset to this problem. So I'm not going to bore everybody with an introduction to Scrum, because I'm pretty sure that most people on this conference know much more about it than I do. But just in case you aren't familiar with it, a very brief pointer to Scrum. It's a framework for managing work on complex development projects, and the basic underlying principles are self-organizing cross-functional teams. So teams can decide themselves, with certain limitations, of course, what work is being taken up over the next period. And they usually consist, these teams, of different disciplines, let's say, front-end, back-end, architects, infrastructure, maybe designers, hopefully, in the same team, as we'll point out later. And the principle is that gradually these teams, these multidisciplinary teams, deliver increments, small batches of new features that make a working application. And everything starts with a product backlog, where all the ideas for future features are collected. And in a sprint planning, so before a 2 or 3 week period of work, the team itself decides what can be taken up in the sprint backlog, and what's the work that can be done over the next 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, depends on the implementation. The sprint starts, and every day there's a little stand-up meeting in the morning to discuss potential blockers, what's the work that's ongoing, basically. At the end of the sprint, there's a review where the work that's been done is demoed, and also external stakeholders can get on. It could be business stakeholders, whatever. And there's also a ritual called the sprint retrospective, to reflect a bit on the way of working, maybe improve pain points in the team collaboration, etc. So that's just a little bit of an introduction. Why did we focus on Scrum? Because I think recent data shows that about 87 to 95% of development teams work in an agile Scrum way of working. So that's pretty significant. So how did we go about this? We first did a little bit of a qualitative exploration, because we had some intuitions, of course, of what might be issues that developers face when they work with UX profiles, but we didn't know which was just our hunch and which were real issues. So we had a very qualitative intake. And when we listed most of the first themes that came about, we did a quantitative validation, so a survey where we let people arrange all the different pain points that were heard of. And at the end, we did a co-creation. I'll get back to that later. So as a first phase, we just spoke to a few Ordina developers, basically. What's the deal? How do you experience working with us? And you can be frank, you can be really honest with us. What's the pain points that you face when you have to work with UX professionals, either researchers or designers? And then we did that on a previous edition of Join, actually. There's a little picture there. In a distant past, where we could all meet in face-to-face meetings. And so we asked, with a little questionnaire. What are issues that you typically face in projects that you've worked on together with UX professionals? And of course, there's no UX work without post-its. So on the wall, we started to cluster all these little inputs, combine them together in the broad themes that came back throughout many of these little conversations. So then in the second phase, as I said, we kind of rephrased all these issues in a similar format and launched this in an online survey where we asked people, can you catalog these? Can you rearrange these different issues into what you've really experienced, and what are the most critical ones for you? Which ones are less important, so we could get a grip on what are the actual problems that are most frequently dealt with. And of course, yeah, we checked that everybody effectively had collaborated with either a researcher or a designer or both. That was, of course, one of the requirements. I'm not going to delve too deep into this, but basically, among the respondents, we had a good mix of front-end, back-end, and full-stack developers. Most of them had 0 to 10 years of experience, but there were also some developers with more experience. Most of them were employed in Europe, mainly in Belgium, the UK, and the Netherlands, but also some from beyond those areas. And then, as I said, we launched a co-creation workshop. So we lured a bunch of developers, Scrum masters, business people, and UX designers into a room after work with some snacks and drinks, and we got them to work. So we listed the most frequently observed issues and pain points when working with UX professionals, and we got to work. We started brainstorming together in little groups. What could be pragmatic solutions, little ideas or bigger ideas that we can try out to improve the collaboration, communication, and deal with these issues, basically. So, as I'm sure you're all dying to know by now, what are the actual experiences that developers have, right? How do they experience it to work with UX professionals? But first of all, about 92% of developers indicate that working with UX professionals helps to increase the value of the end product. So that was, of course, a bit of a relief for us. Many indicate, about 85%, that their involvement contributes to the specification of functional requirements, for example. 87% say, well, the availability of wireframes helps developers focus on their tasks. So many developers tell us that they like to focus on the more technical aspect of the job, building, analyzing, and then it's great that there are UX designers who focus more on the visual layouting, on the structure of the journeys and the flows. So each one can focus on what they're best at, basically. And 90% said actually that the availability of those wireframes make it easier to align with clients. And that's also something that a UX profile can do, because there is a clear visual representation of the future work. It helps to launch the dialogue between business people, technical people, because there's something concrete to talk about, right? But then, of course, we were in it for the insights, right? For the real learnings. What are the pain points that are being observed? And then something that came back quite often, 29% of the developers either agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that designers are often not sufficiently aware of what's technically feasible. And one of the quotes there was, UX professionals often do not possess the technical knowledge to assess the complexity of the technical implementation of the design component or user interface element. They need to work closely with developers to get this understanding. So that was pretty clear. Around 43% of the developers said that they're not involved early enough in the design process. And of course, these things are connected with each other. UX experts need to check with developers to see if a feature is possible, particularly if they don't have the technical skills required to judge it. And then as a last 30%, a significant one, designs are often not ready for development when development starts. When you look at designs, it's almost always in a case where all the data fits perfectly in the best scenario. Everything is nicely aligned in those cases, it's symmetrical. But as developers, we also need to know how to display things in worst cases, and really long labels, a lot of data, not so clean data. Of course, if the designer doesn't take it into account and just shows ideal scenarios to business that business then validates, it can be that developers then have to deal with solving the problematic cases. So then we took to an analysis. So we looked at the most frequent issues being observed and looked at the root causes of that. And then basically it boils down to three root causes. First, limited involvement of the right people at the right time. So sometimes it can be that there's just not enough overlap for developers and designers to collaborate, or there are no meetings scheduled between them. So one thing that we took to the co-creation workshops was, how can we increase involvement between the different parties? As a second, limited knowledge of each other's field of expertise. So then, of course, how could we increase the knowledge? And this really goes both ways, right? There's a technical knowledge with designers, and there's UX knowledge with the developer side of the story. And then as a third, different views on the value of UX research and design. And this is a bit more of a cultural thing, because we can all wish to communicate more often as researchers, designers, and developers. But what if sales teams don't sell projects where there is enough overlap to do those things? Or what if business doesn't, our clients don't really see the benefit of this collaboration? Then we are very well to suggest it, but if the culture doesn't have it in it to see the value of it, then there won't be enough occasions to collaborate, basically. So how can we align values of the collaboration between UXers and developers? So yeah, then we've come to the solutions. To which extent can we remedy those solutions, and how fundamental should remedies be? And one focus we took is that we wanted to focus on really feasible solutions, or small things you can do on a day-to-day basis that you could try out on Monday, or that you maybe have tried out already, to work on this collaboration, to improve this communication. Because we're, of course, not the first ones to address this topic, right? If you look at articles you can read of Agile UX, or if you look at the Lean UX framework, for example, these are all meant to improve the collaboration between developers and UX professionals. But these are big frameworks, right? Lean UX, if you go on Monday to your client and you suggest, hey, maybe we should revert the whole way of working and change to a Lean UX framework, well, good luck. It's just not going to work to overhaul a complete way of working from one day to another. And the same goes with Agile UX. Sometimes you read an article that states a blog post, yeah, maybe it's a good idea to start implementing a design sprint, let's say, that goes 2 weeks ahead of the development sprint, and that's about it. And then you think, okay, how do I install this? All right, how do we move from the way of working of today to that? And it's somehow not really clear concretely how to start doing this. So we wanted our suggestions to be really compact and easy to try out. And the fundamental idea, the underlying principle of all of those, is that we propose to make more optimal or different use of existing Scrum ceremonies, right? Nobody wants more meetings. Buy-in will just decrease every time you come up with another ritual, another meeting. So we believe that we need to make use, or better use, of the rituals in Scrum that already exist, and they have been designed, let's say, with collaboration in mind. They're precisely introduced in the framework because we want to encourage collaboration between different team members. So if we just plug in UXers in there, that's where we need to go, right? So, and a first one you could try out is a systematic design review. This can happen during the morning stand-ups at 9:30 or 10 or 9. The designer shows what he's been working on or she's been working on. This can be very low-level work, early sketches, or it can be more high-fidelity mock-ups at the end of the sprint. But basically, this is the stuff I've been working on yesterday. Do you have any issues? Do you see already problems with feasibility, etc.? The designer can take in this feedback and immediately include it in the work of the day that will follow, actually. So that's a systematic design review throughout the entire sprint. Another one is the definition of done for designs. So it's something that's very common for user stories, development work, not as much for designs. But you can also think of a checklist of agreements of different properties that a finished design needs to possess, right? Instead of just throwing something over the wall towards the developers, you could come up with an exact list that needs to be ticked off, and otherwise it's not ready for development. And we tried it out. It's not something that we just came up with out of nowhere, but we, on a previous project, we came up with such a list over time. So in the first sprint, some designs were discussed, and there came feedback from the developer saying, yeah, but we still miss this state, we still need that other state, etc. And over time, that list, that checklist, that definition of done for designs grew. And it's even something, if there are different development teams, that you can scale across different design and development teams, right? It's something that you can reuse. As a third idea, you could design while refine. So this might be something that UX designers could be a bit wary of, because it means live designing. Of course, we don't mean finishing, like designing until a finished product, but it's something that could happen, for example, during a backlog prioritization meeting where you have business experts, UX experts, and developers in the same room. And sometimes you get these discussions of how things should look like, how things should work. If as a designer you can shuffle around a bit with the big blocks or the large portions of a customer journey, it really helps the discussion. It's the reason why we make wireframes and mockups in the first place. And it's not possible, of course, to finish a design entirely. That's not what we want to suggest, but you can shuffle around with the main components, and then the designer can afterwards just really do the finishing touches, send it around and said, okay, this is what we've discussed. Is this all right? Instead of just talking about things that you can't see, that don't materialize, and after which you need to have a whole email chain to then agree, maybe another meeting, etc. This is something that could really shortcut that whole discussion. Another one is user story kickoffs. What do we mean by that? At the moment, a developer starts working on a new user story. This could be Tuesday, 10 a.m. It could also be Thursday, 4 p.m. Whenever work starts on a new user story, quickly the researcher, the designer, and the developer group together and discuss the user story. Because let's face it, no matter how good our templates for user stories are, you can never really capture all the context, all the history behind a certain feature in that user story description, right? It's not feasible. You wouldn't want to write it out that long. But just for that informal background of the research that was done around that feature, the design work that was done before, and any sort of requirements in the user story, these three groups can still get together and align quickly. So the developer, when he starts to work on it, at the actual moment, again, has that whole context a bit refreshed. UX experts participate in software testing, another one. As soon as development on a user story is finished, typically there are dedicated testers, user acceptance testers, for example, that go through all sorts of scenarios to see whether the development work is fit for purpose. Well, actually, UX experts could really play a role in this testing as well. It could even be part of the definition of done of user stories, right? Being ticked off by the UX expert. From a research point of view, it could be about, is the product still evolving in the direction of something that corresponds to the user needs of the actual target audience. From a designer perspective, it could be a bit more literal, like, is the development work still corresponding to the original design work that was done? But there's certainly a role for UX people to play in software testing. UX experts could also participate in story estimation. Now, that's maybe something that's a bit more controversial for developers. So, for example, during poker planning, when the workload of a user story is being estimated, it could be that UX experts really actively participate in that with a binding vote. Why do we say binding? Because, of course, if it's not binding, it's a little bit on the side, right? You don't really get that understanding because the discussion will not be real. And this could actually be an amazing learning moment for UX experts, because they really there needs to be this dialogue on why is something a little bit unfeasible? Why is it a lot of development work? Why is it less development work? And over time, in these multidisciplinary teams, UX people can also get a lot more technical understanding and a realization of what is very feasible and what is less feasible. Developers could observe user testing. So it's something that, as we said before, needs to be adopted by the culture. Business needs to agree that a developer frees up time to attend a user test. Now, it's very common for designers, again, not as much for developers, but it could also be a really good learning moment for developers to see how are users actually reacting on the product that I've been working on. It makes also the whole team part of the same product team in a way. It's not always possible to have everybody attending those user tests, of course, but at least there should be some time to watch the videos. Or another possibility is to invite a user during the sprint review. I wouldn't put the person into the actual sprint review meeting room. I wouldn't want to be that user testing an application when there's 20 people looking over my shoulder, but you could stream the video stream right into the room, or alternatively, just show some videos during the sprint review. And this really gets everybody attuned in the same direction, right? A basic training for each of them in their respective fields. So a basic UX training for developers could be an option, or a basic development training could be an option for UX professionals, just to get started and to get the basics, even for the specific ecosystem during a particular project. So yeah, this is a bit of a recap. I think it's clear that most of these ideas are situated in existing Scrum rituals. We hope that they're feasible to try out. And I would actually look forward to hear more from you also. If you have questions, because I'm nearly coming to the end of the presentation, but if you have questions, I'm happy to respond to them. But if you have things you've tried out from the lists and you have experience with, or you have tried different things to improve the collaboration, communication, I'd be happy to hear them. There is a white paper giving more details about this project, so you can download it through this link. I'll make sure to add it in the chat on Gather later on, so you can look back at it, so you don't have to write it down here. And that's about it, actually. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks a lot for the attention. And yeah, if you have any questions or suggestions, things you've tried out, please do share them.